You are too puritanical,
Yeah,
too
sorry, please go on.
puritanical, too puritanical for me because I have become kind of diluted and corrupt. I believe in my practice. I work on principles and not. Uh, I cannot say that I use the technique or anything. But this is what cultural approach has taught me.
It's a very interesting topic. We'll take up some of it today.
Oh, thank you, sir.
So last time we were on this point of doing therapy. So the first thing that comes up, not first thing, but one of the things that comes up is the problem of reenactment.
Sorry, sorry, I'm
Uh,
not good enough.
yeah, yeah. So the patient unconsciously reenacts what happened before. And in that reenactment can get you involved unconsciously. That through transference, projective identification, through choice of what he says, how he responds, the whole elaborate unconscious action happens so that you get involved in that reenactment. So reenactment is very important in the sense the patient will recreate the scene of the past by transference, projective identification, saying something, not saying something. He will somehow reenact a scene from the past and entice you to take the role in that reenactment he wants you to take. It is often termed in therapy language that he is drawing you in, meaning he wants to create a reenactment of some scene and he is offering you a role and unconsciously slowly dragging you in to fulfill that role. And you get dragged into it unknowingly and you start actually becoming a part of that reenactment, a player in that. Say, for example, somebody has this thing of I am not good enough being told to him by everybody. So what he will do is he will somehow reenact the scene and make you conclude that he is not good enough or make you say he is not good enough and reconfirm what actually he wants to heal. It is something familiar, and that reenactment can have two purposes. One is to recreate the familiar. It can just be the repetition of the repressed, or it may be something brought out in the open so that it can be healed. So he may be communicating to you the core problem that this is what I am reenacting over and over again because this is the problem to be solved, and I am reenacting over and over again because it is not healed. So reenactment of abandonment, reenactment of attacking. They will do passive aggression till you become angry, and then they will reconfirm to themselves that everyone attacks me. There can be a pathological collusion that the therapist is not comfortable with pre-Oedipal pathology. The patient is not comfortable with pre-Oedipal pathology, and therefore unconsciously they collude that the therapy goes on for years, but it's always Oedipal pathology. They are not going into pre-Oedipal pathology. It's a pathological collusion between the therapist and the patient. And this is a point where the intersubjectivity comes in. that you may have uh, therapists from the same school, but every therapist is not the same. He may be practicing the same school, the same technique, even have the same supervisors, but he will not necessarily have the same personality. And therefore, the same school, the same techniques being used produce very different atmosphere and very different results for patients. So the pathological collusion is something which is best pointed out by supervisor. This is one of the points where it's difficult to trust oneself. It's like the old incident where somebody asked Freud that, just a moment, I'll just complete this. Somebody asked Freud in a humorous way that everyone says you are an autocrat, narcissist, masochist, and a sadist. As a leading psychologist, what is your personal opinion on this? And Freud wrote back to him saying, when it comes to myself, I don't trust my opinion. So this is one of the points where I know myself best does not work. In many situations, it works that I know myself better than anybody else. But in this situation, it does not work. Yeah. Sir, you're saying something.
I had the doubt that some clarification about pathological collusion,
Yeah.
wherein the conflict is actually Oedipal, but both therapist and patient continue to behave as if it is pre-Oedipal.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Or it can be the other way.
Uh-huh.
It is
Mhm.
the idea is both of them don't want to touch a particular wound which they have in common. And therefore, defenses of the two come together in a confederation that the enemy's enemies are the friend. So the defenses of the two come together in collusion, and years pass by and something very obvious is not touched. And this easily is brought up by supervision because any supervisor will say, why this is not being touched? It looks strange that therapy goes on for years and obviously Oedipal and pre-Oedipal both have to be touched at some point. It's just not normal that either Oedipal or pre-Oedipal is just left out. In Indian situation, often it is a sexual material. And here the wound need not be common. There may be a wound on one side and anxiety on the other side. That also can be a collusion. For example, in the Indian situation, the patient may not want to look at the Oedipal wound. It provokes too much of anxiety, too much of shame, too much of guilt. And the therapist has anxiety that if I touch that wound, will he think of me as a pervert? Will he go away and tell everyone else that these are the questions I ask? This is the kind of discussion I do. What will happen to me? So the professional anxiety of the therapist can collude with the defenses of the patient, and together it can be a pathological collusion. Where after that, the therapist does not even try. Usually what happens is all these things are known to the therapist. And so we try to do it indirectly. In the Indian situation, most often, we try to do it indirectly. For example, I'm seeing a patient right now where the complaint is of repeated taking bath. The person keeps taking bath. After the person comes out, the person feels that again the person has become dirty. Now the challenge is that the person is extremely traditional and even in the dreams won't think about Oedipus. I don't mean literally, because literally the person will be thinking about nothing but Oedipus in the dreams. But now the whole point is, how do you bring that thing in, knowing fully well that I have to bring it in at some point because that is the road to healing to whatever extent we can. But the whole point is, how do you make it? How do you make it possible? So I have started with just the concept of dirt, physical as well as moral. And then I'm going to ask her to watch her dreams or tell that person that everyone has this kind of thoughts. Thoughts don't mean action. And it is natural for people to have thoughts. So slowly it might sink in, but there at least I am trying. I am anxious about not saying it openly, but I am not in a collusion because I am definitely trying in an indirect way whatever is possible in the Indian situation to do it. Patient creates an unconscious elaborate entanglement that the entanglement may be multifold. On one hand, the patient will not come for adequate number of sessions, citing lack of time. On the other hand, he will bring material to take you away from the core. Third, he may give you some dreams which are very interesting but will take you off the core point of it. Fourth, he puts very strong projective identification into you. And fifth, he offers you a role in one of his enactments. And that creates a very elaborate kind of entanglement. And that is where the judgment comes into play, because there's something called intuitive perception of truth. That even if we have not tested everything out, intuitively we know this is true and this is not true. And over a period of time, we sharpen this intuition and we start trusting it. That's a very precious thing in psychotherapy, the intuitive perception of truth. Intuitively, what are you feeling? Many of my teachers used to tell me, trust your instinct. That what you feel right there is very important. Trust your instinct. So this is another way where we have to get out of that elaborate entanglement. Critical moments in therapy. These are very, very important. They may be moments where the patient repeats a paradox. He has said X is not good on Wednesday, and today he is saying X is very good. So it's a critical moment for you to close the split and say, that day you said this, today you are saying this. If you put it together, what is it? It's a very good moment to close the split. Similarly, he brings out that I took up job X because I wanted to impress a few people around me. And then after they were impressed, I did not know what to do. And then after some time, I did not perform in my job and I was fired. And now I don't feel like doing anything. So it's a moment to bring up to him that are you looking for a new group that you can impress? So that can give you a goal. That somehow the goal dependence is on social groups. You can't give a goal to yourself. You need a social group to give you a goal. So these are critical moments. Some critical moments will be the patient says something about somebody else who said X and asks you, I did this, don't you think this was right? And when you don't say anything, the patient says, why are you silent? Are you on my side or are you on his side? And in such moments, you may have to lie. You may not have the option of keeping silence, which is the option you would like to exercise. And because these are critical moments, the patient may just say, if you are not with me, it's over. It's just all over. And those are the critical moments you have to keep the therapy going, even by lying if you have to. Dream analysis. It's very, very important. As Jung says, or Freud says, dreams are the royal road to the unconscious. And Jung says, dreams are what bring to us the unvarnished truth of the unconscious. How much of it to use? And first, you will have to encourage the patient to remember, write down and bring these dreams, because most people would think dreams are not important. So first, the psychoeducation has to happen in small doses. It should not look like we are holding a class, but in small statements. And if you have some dreams, why don't you bring it? It's very important to know what the dreams have to tell us. And when he brings the dream, we take interest in it. And that he becomes more and more encouraged to bring his dreams. And that gives us insight into his unconscious, far more than we can do by free association. Let me give one dream recently I interpreted. A girl is walking with a man who is smoking a cigarette. And they are standing by a road in Mumbai. And the road is very wide. So what the government has done is, it has created a walkover over that road. So both of them climb the walkover and they are walking to the other side. But just before they were about to reach the end of the other side, they realize that the walkover is only till then. And the scene suddenly shifts to a mountain top. And below that mountain top, the girl is seeing the valley. And the valley is a live volcano full of lava. So this was the dream the patient brought to the session. And obviously the dream is interpreted in the context of the case history. So it was very clear that the person smoking the cigarette represented three different people in the life of the person. It was a condensation. One of the principles of dream analysis, that two or three things are put together in one element. Like for example, in some dream you can have tiger, and the tiger may represent literally the tiger, the father, or the aggression of the person, or maybe all three together in one image. It's like a zip file, a visual zip file. The moment you open it, the meanings spring out of it. So when we do dream analysis, we'll see what are the principles of analyzing a dream. But one of the principles is condensation. That two or three things get condensed into one element. So here the condensation was, the man smoking the cigarette represented one of the boyfriends, one of the persons, the person was about to get married but could not get married, and also, very interestingly, the early life mother. And the idea was that the road signified the journey of life, and in the journey of life, the person had to move from being unmarried to married, and that was the overbridge one had to cross. The overbridge from being unmarried to the other side being married, but it was not happening. The marriage was not happening. So the overbridge stopped. You could not go on the other side. And suddenly you went to a very different kind of scene of mountain and the volcano. That is because the marriage was not happening because of the behavior of the patient in particular way, which was triggered by early life experience of the mountain and the volcano, the valley. And the early life experience of the mountain and the valley was actually the experience of object loss. That the early life object loss put the person into a volcanic valley, and she had to eject out of it on the mountain top. That was the only way to eject out of it. And now, because she is fragile on the mountain top and she is terrified of falling into the valley again, meaning terrified of losing somebody again, that she finds it very difficult to get close to anybody. That she needs an optimum distance, too close and it's terrifying, too far and it's terrifying. Too far you feel lonely, too close you feel terrified of the closeness, of the abandonment which will come if you get close. And therefore, the person is holding on that mountaintop position in a very difficult way, because every wind of reality can throw you out. And the moment the person holds onto that mountain top, and along with the fear of closeness, people come close and go away because we make them go away. So this is what the dream is telling you, that the early life object loss which created this mountain valley situation is something you will have to heal before you will overcome the fear of closeness, and only that will allow you to walk on the other side and get married. Now, this is something very important, that it tells us what is in the unconscious of the person straight away. Obviously, this requires a lot of theory and practice of dream analysis. I was fortunate because I had created the Valley Junction model of personality disorders, in which this precisely was the idea, that early life object loss leads to a valley situation and you jump out of the valley on a mountain top. And how you jump out of the valley, whether on a full mountain top or a small mountain top or partly on the road and partly on the mountain top, that determines the type of personality disorder you develop. So this is very important. Then we come to Oedipal dynamics. This is where the two things are a problem. One is, how do you talk about it? And in India, even in the most educated, you see huge resistance to this. Second is, how do you control your counter-transference? It's very easy to fall in a relationship with the patient. It's very, very easy.
Is it okay to ask a doubt about the dream that we discussed just now?
Please go ahead.
If she initially there was a difficulty making out that it was her dream, who was dreaming was not clear. Then, secondly, when she jumps out of the valley somehow and is on the top, uh, was she with the person with a cigarette in the hand?
No, no.
Does the cigarette have signify something phallic symbol?
Yes, it
And
does. And it also
and
signifies one of the elements, one of the ex boyfriends used to smoke.
is it worthwhile to imagine that she's finding that closeness and she closed the gap which she had actually felt by getting married to this person, that she overcomes the ambivalence because she survived the experience of falling into the valley.
So there you can put two phenomena here. There is a very early life pre-Oedipal object loss, which has created the personality disorder, and the person went into the Oedipal phase already with the pre-Oedipal problem. So there was a huge Oedipal loss also, the phallic symbol that you are referring to. So one more condensation can be that of the father. That at that stage, one could not walk to the end of it to marrying the father. So the condensation is one more person of the father. So we see the pre-Oedipal and the Oedipal, both elements are there in the dream. And the present life situation is also in the dream. And how the present life situation is emerging out of those early life events. So dreams are very, very important, and they pack far more than we can unpack. One can actually go on and on with the dream. In fact, if you sit with a person with his dream for a very long time, you will end up creating half of his case history. And there are very representative dreams of a personality where, in a generic sense, you can create a case history out of the dream, not in the specific sense. Like, we can definitely say there was an object loss in early life. Now, how it happened, when it happened, what duration it happened, why did it happen, those are specifics. That will come only from data. But in a generic sense, we know that we are dealing with an early life object loss, specifics of which we don't. So the generic comes to us from theory and our understanding. Of course, theory is something that you internalize and you believe because you know it's working. It's not just because it's published somewhere. So let me say personally vetted theory. That you deploy a personally vetted theory on data, and that gives you a generic case history. Like in many cases, I have been able to say that this has happened to you. The person said, no, I don't remember anything of that. And after some time, they talked to their parents and they told him, हाँ, बराबर है. This is what happened.
Expert intuition.
Yes, yes. So second is the counter transference we have to control for Oedipal thing. Because the Oedipal dynamics creates strong counter transferences. And it's very easy for the therapist and the patient to fall in love with each other. And this is what happens often. And here we have to be careful before becoming holier than thou and beating up somebody with a moral stick. Because if you are doing CBT, DBT, REBT, it's a very different cup of tea. Even ISTDP is a very different cup of tea. But if you are doing classical psychoanalysis, the strength of this counter transfer is of a completely different level. So it's very easy to be holier than thou, because those who be that, they have no idea of the forces somebody is dealing with. It's only when you experience it firsthand you realize what kind of forces are you dealing with and how difficult it is to extract oneself out of it. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why it is far more difficult to do psychoanalysis than to do other things. One is the sheer intellectual difficulty of the theory. That is one part. Second, it takes very long time to digest it. Very, very long time. The third is the counter transferences and the projective identifications that we are dealing with. And the fourth is the unstructured nature of it. Structured therapies are very easy to understand and get skilled in. Then we get into deeper, Oedipal dynamics can actually continue for a very long time. Even after the therapy is over, you can still have the counter transference on. And this can take any kind of form. For example, I was doing online therapy for some patients, and some of them actually came to see me here to have a session in person. But what they had in mind was actually to have a relationship. And you have to be controlling yourself and not fall into that. And many times therapy ends because of this, that either the patient or the therapist or both are not able to control their counter transferences, the Oedipal dynamics. This can also lead to a very different kind of thing, where the patient, in one of the situations I know, in fact, one of my teachers he went into training analysis with a lady therapist, and he came out to be a sadist and she came out to be a masochist, and both of them were single. So it was like an ideal couple, that both are interested in psychoanalysis. One is a sadist, one is a masochist. So actually it went to that extent that neither of them could control completely. The therapy had to be stopped, and the pause had to be given, because after the therapy stops, you have to give a pause. The Indian law says 6 months, that for 6 months after the stoppage of therapy, you cannot have relationships. In American law, I think it's 2 years. So they waited out that period and then got into a relationship. So these are very strong forces which are very difficult to control. Deeper Kleinian dynamics. This is something one can go into only if one is trained, because one is looking at very early life part-object transferences. Part-object meaning one has not yet learned that the breast is a part of a full person called the mother. One is only dealing with a part object, and one does not have the idea of a full object. That the part object belongs to a larger full object. So this deeper part object transferences are very difficult to deal with. Then we look at, do we take everything in transference? One of the sessions last week, one person brought out that whole idea of the Divan. I had told you about it, the Divan. Again, the 1857 incident at the Divan. And that is where I took that in transference. That he is not narrating just to make a point that he is making. Behind that is also a transferential element. Some people on the extreme believe whatever you say in the session is transferential. That there is always an unconscious story behind everything that you say. Some people believe that there are some things which have a story and some things which you just literally say it. So I believe in that there are transferential stories and there are non-transferential stories. So this I took in a transferential way, and I said, I brought in this whole idea of loss, and the person was very happy that that idea was brought in. I really found him getting involved in it. Because last time, as I said, this refers to an early life loss leading to a persecutory anxiety. And the persecutory anxiety was to be solved by the Divan, that is me. And the Divan has not only to solve it in the unconscious, but create a bridge of light from the unconscious to the conscious. Then and there versus here and now. The patient says,
Sir, I have a question.
please go on.
Some the dream not only projects the part of healing or where the healing should, go towards. At times, it is very confusing for the therapist. Also, the unconscious tries to, confuse the therapist by creating a confusing dream. How do we see that? Because there would be a transference which we feel that okay, there are certain elements there, but how do we explain this unconscious trying to play out smart and confusing the therapist also? Because then there are always series of dreams. It doesn't happen in one single dream. When the patient starts sharing the series of dreams, I've seen
Right.
sometimes unconscious plays way too smart there.
Correct. So if too many dreams are being brought into the session, then we have to look at whether dream is being used as a defense. So that is one point where we have to see whether the unconscious is using dream as a defense, so that we are entangled in dream analysis and we don't go where the patient fears we might go, if there was no dream presented. That is one. The second is, if the patient brings a dream and the therapist is confused because the dream is too complicated, then the unconscious gets an idea that I can confuse the therapist and keep him from moving to my center by presenting a dream. So the lack of the therapist's capability allows the unconscious of the patient to see this as one more possible resistance. Those are the two very important elements. And there, the intuitive ability of the therapist is very important, because dream analysis involves a lot of intuition. Like much of psychoanalysis involves huge amount of intuition. So the patient says, I had an interview today and I felt very slighted that I had to appear at interview of such companies. Now you can talk in then and there, or you can bring it here and now. It almost seems like that our session is almost like an interview, that I am asking you something and you are telling me, or you are telling me and I'm counter questioning you. And you see this session not as a session, but almost as an interview. And you also feel ashamed to be in presence of somebody like me, that I have to give an interview to somebody like you. So the idealization, de-idealization is at work. That the narcissistic part of the patient already has de-idealized you and idealized oneself. So if I bring it into here and now, I will have to get into all of this. If I don't bring it into here,
Sir, how does this idealization and de-idealization helps the unconscious?
the idealization and de-idealization helps the unconscious, because the unconscious feels that without an omnipotent object, I can't stabilize the anxiety and the destruction and disintegration inside of me. I need an unconscious object, omnipotent object, to stabilize the disintegration and chaos inside. And for that, I idealize the other and make him omnipotent. That is one. Second, the unconscious feels that I have a little bit of goodness in me and that I have to preserve. And the only way I can preserve is by putting it into somebody who looks omnipotent. So I put my goodness into the other who I idealize. And therefore, in dependence and in histrionicity, one of the core difficulties is in owning up the good in oneself. The good has to be constantly deposited into the other, and the other has to be maintained as omnipotent for the inner requirements. So this is why, one, we deposit our good in a stronger locker because we don't believe our bank is strong enough. And second, there is a need for an omnipotent other to stabilize the inner anxiety and chaos, which cannot be stabilized without an omnipotent other. And it's a very clear self-belief that I cannot be that omnipotent other, I am not good enough. So how much you can do here and now depends upon how many things you do in transference and how much the patient can take. Very few people can take here and now. And it's very easy for the patient to say, this is crazy. I'm talking to you about an interview and you're talking to me about this session. There is no comparison. Where do you see any comparison, any connection? He will go out and say the therapist requires therapy more than I do. It's like there was a psychotic patient in ISTDP. And the therapist said, the patient was not getting in touch with the feelings. He was creating a wall. So the therapist said, do you see this wall between you and me? Meaning, you are not connecting to me. You are putting up too many resistances. So he said, do you see this wall between you and me? So the patient said, take tablets regularly. Within a few weeks, it will go away. Because the patient in a psychotic mode was taking it literally. Similarly, there was an intervention. Don't you see you are held back by the ghosts of the past? And the person started looking in all the four directions. Okay, where are the ghosts who are holding me? So this is like in here and now. Very few people can take here and now. This is a very Kleinian, and therefore one of the very difficult therapies to go through. That if everything that you say is brought into here and now, it's like you are in high anxiety all the time. Okay, what will come out of this interpretation? And even more difficult is when the therapist brings himself in. That the person says, you know, my boss, he is a real scoundrel. And the therapist says, you mean I am a scoundrel? What you have done is you have taken that thing into transference in a transferential way, and you have brought yourself in. Another way could have been when you say the boss is a scoundrel, he's an authority figure. So could it be that you want to mean your father is a scoundrel? So you're taking it in transference, but it is still there, then and there. It's not here and now, and you are not in. So one of the most difficult things is to take something in transference, bring it into here and now, and bring yourself in. That's one of the most difficult things to do. Yes, please.
Sir, suppose there is a patient who has the tendency to or the ability to respond more positively to logical explanations. If I explain to the client that this is the transference that you are doing now in a very technical, and I give him the psychoanalytic theory behind it, will it help or will it harm?
First is that this group is very small. There is this group, no doubt about it, but this group is small. That most people don't get well by a logical explanation unless it enters into a self-discovery of a very alive kind. That only when the affect is alive inside of you and you see it in operation, that if you want them to see the transferential process, you have to point it out when this is on. That when the process is on and you put an interpretation, the person understands, deeply speaking, what it actually means. And once they understand it, then you can use it in 10 different ways and they will understand, yes, the same thing is happening in 10 different places. So that is one. A small group will be helped. And this is the technique which was used by Girindra Shekhar Bose, the father of Indian psychoanalysis, who was in touch with Freud in correspondence, even when Freud was alive. And Girindra Shekhar Bose used to use this technique that, for example, you want to deal with Oedipus and you're finding it very difficult to get in. So you give him a chapter from Freud to read, and the person comes back and asks you, do you think this is true, what he's saying? And that can be a roundabout way of getting in, because now a world authority is saying it. So you don't say, I am a pervert. Otherwise, the patient will go out and say, the man is a pervert. So in very difficult, extremely conservative situations, this can be a way out. For a small group who are very logically inclined and open, this can be a very fast way out.
Okay, yeah.
That you explain the person, and next time it happens, you can point out and the person gets it. Ha, Bhavna, you were saying something?
Sir, Similarly, when there are certain patients who are now, because they've been in therapy for 1.5 years, the unconscious becomes very honest. So in the therapy space, we are having discussions, purely psychoanalytically driven discussions, but still there is this stuckness. While in the transference, we can feel the Oedipal element being lived out and being projected onto someone else in the outer world. uh, Still, the stuckness, is it to do with the quantum of anxiousness and guilt generated, and these two external and therapeutic elements are not able to compensate and live out the desire?
Right.
So, in such a scenario, what do we do? If still there is a huge amount of anxiety being generated.
Correct. So this is where the Oedipal transference does not happen.
Mhm.
The Oedipal transference happens partly. It does not happen, but it does not come up vividly. In the sense, the patient does not feel drawn to the therapist in a strong affective way, and the therapist also does not feel counter-transference towards it. Which means the Oedipus is being deflected out of the therapy room.
Mhm.
So in Kleinian therapy, there is a tool which is called collecting transparencies.
Okay,
Meaning
that's interesting.
that you may have 10 transparencies outside of in the real life. One on authority figure, second on a woman, third on a child, fourth on a teacher. Now, what we do is in therapy, we collect all the transparencies over time. So everything comes on the therapist in some way or the other. And the more transparencies are collected, the more issues are solved in the therapy room. Because what is collected and plays out while it is playing out can be solved. This is one idea. Now, what is happening?
Probably in the kind of case which I'm referring to, it is happening the other way around. The client is doing the collective projection onto oneself, what a therapist is supposed to be doing.
Yes, the point there will be of uh, safety, anxiety, and guilt. In some cases, also shame. So,
Is it not
safety,
the greed in the Kleinian way to put it onto the outer objects, all good objects, and then projecting onto oneself? Isn't it the greed?
greed can play a part, but more likely are these things that, let us say, why these transferences are not happening. One,
No,
there can be a,
transferences are happening.
I'm talking,
Counter trans. Okay.
I'm referring to the vivid Oedipal transference.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, everything else is happening, but the vivid Oedipal transference is not happening. And the therapist also is not feeling a vivid counter transference. One reason for that can be the too much of guilt involved in the Oedipal process. Second reason can be too much of anxiety of castration. This will be there if the person has got into the Oedipal phase with a problem in the pre-Oedipal phase. So when you get into the Oedipal phase with the split open, the Oedipal terror multiplies manifold.
Hmm.
So everyone goes through the Oedipal phase, but some go into it without a pre-Oedipal trauma, in which case they feel the normal castration anxiety. And some go into it with a pre-Oedipal trauma, which multiplies the castration anxiety manifold. And it takes both ways. It also makes the mother look far more celestial than she actually is. Because if the split is open, both will happen to the extreme. The good object will look ecstatically celestial, sublime, and the bad object will look omnipotently torturous. So you have an omnipotent ecstasy and omnipotent torture. So the extremes are far more intense than they are for a normal person where the pre-Oedipal trauma is not there. So that may be a reason why the Oedipus is not coming out. Third can be that the therapist as a person is not at the place where the patient would like the ideal Oedipal object to be. For example, let us say the patient has dependence, and the therapist is also a soft person who does not appear like the omnipotent other,
Mm.
the type of father the patient wants. So there is a dissonance between the expected father and the real father, and the patient then finds the expected father in the outer life. Same way you will see in histrionicity, that in histrionicity, it can easily go along with search for somebody who is a sociopath. Because for the histrionic mechanism, this is like a defiance of the repressed anger, that the father is being defied by settling for a sociopath. It is like defiance of the father, of it's a pouring out of the repressed anger in a self-destructive way. So the anger towards the father is released in a self-destructive way by depending on a sociopath whom the father would never like. So again there, the transference will go, the Oedipal transference will go towards a sociopath rather than a therapist. You can also have extreme shame, where the person has such high levels of shame that he would not dare to bring up the Oedipal thing in any way, and for many months the transference will not happen. The seductive transference, the power element will be there. The pre-Oedipal omnipotent transferences are far more easy to make compared to the Oedipal transference, vivid Oedipal transference. Yes, please.
Just going through this, I have a brief comment, which I hope you may not find too inappropriate. I feel that the therapist also, over the period of years, goes through like the phases of development in psychoanalysis. Like initially, the ego was very helpless at, at the hands of id and superego. And slowly, ego got its strength and became the arbiter. And then it would become strong enough to decide what is allowable to the superego and what is allowable to the id. And this is how the therapist also feels after years of experience.
Correct. So
Part of it may be superficial. Everybody is not expert, I agree. But it is good that one feels masterful to some extent.
correct. And this obviously is an evolution of skills which happens by practice. That is one part of it. Part of it happens by knowledge and supervision, second part of it. But there are two more elements. One is you learn by mistakes. There's
100%.
no doubt about it. That Osho used to say a very good statement, that the way to the truth lies only through the false. So there's one part of it, and then there's another part of it, that the therapist also can heal the patient. The patient also can help the therapist heal himself. So there is a very popular paper on this. The patient as a therapist for the therapist. That the therapist has chosen the profession of therapy. The choice is not an innocent choice. There are unconscious motivations, and one of the unconscious motivations can be there is something remaining to be healed. The normal tendency of the human organism is to forget the mind and the body and get lost in the satisfaction of desires. If this is not happening, then there is something at work. Not necessarily something destructive, it can be something very evolutionary. But something is at work which is not regular. It can be extraordinary, it can be abnormal or both, but something is at work. So the therapist also gets healed over a period of time. So that also is one element.
Thank you.
Now the anxiety. Now the therapist part of it. The therapist also has to heal himself. Therapist has to overcome difficult parts in himself. And this is more so in psychoanalysis than in other areas. In other areas, you can learn a very rational, structured form of therapy, practice it and be good at it in say 1 year or 2 years. But psychoanalysis takes a very long time. You have to be in the inner world for years. And you can do that only if there is some wound in you not yet completely healed. Otherwise, what is the incentive in being in the inner world? Why are you not forgetting the mind and the body and getting lost in satisfaction of desire like everybody else? So, unhealed wound is a very good asset for a therapist. And in psychoanalysis, this is all the more important because it's very, very autobiographical. One of the experts, Melzer, used to say, if it is not autobiographical enough, it is not psychoanalytic enough. That autobiographical element is very important, and usually you are an expert in what you have suffered before.
So you said unhealed wound or unhealed wound?
Unhealed.
Unhealed. Thank you.
Because if you are completely healed, then two things happen. One, you don't remain inside for a long time, you get lost in the outer world. And the second part is you become holier than thou and you lose the empathy which comes from being one on the side of the patient. That when you say he is also like me, you are far more open and humble than when you say I am healed, he is yet to reach where I have reached. So for psychoanalysis, usually you are an expert in area that you have suffered before. I used to always say, erstwhile neurotics are the best Freudians, and erstwhile psychotics are the best Kleinians. Concept turns into conviction in psychoanalysis only in the laboratory of the self. Like I am very good in personality disorders because I have them myself and I grew up with people with personality disorders. For me, it was every day. So there is a natural tendency to specialize in something that you have or you had or you have seen very intimately around you. So coming to the therapist's anxiety, first is starting the session. There can be anxiety of, let me do something, this silence is unnerving. The therapist is unable to hold his anxiety when the patient is not saying anything. He has come in, he has taken the seat or on the couch, whatever be, and he is silent, and the therapist is now anxious. So one has to learn to control one's anxiety till the patient starts the session. And of course, I said exceptions are apart. In the early part of the therapy, you have to start the session. If you are dealing with a dependent person or a very anxious person, you may have to start it. All exceptions apart. But one point is, in steady state situation, we should be able to hold our anxiety. Therapist can be anxious what to do now. He is confused. The patient says something, since the patient communicates a dream and you don't know what to do about it. The therapist has anxiety that the patient will go away. That if he makes an interpretation, the patient will go away. The therapist is confused. Is it proper or not proper to say it? The therapist knows something in technical terms, but he is yet to couch it in a vernacular language. For example, in Gujarat, you may get to speak to somebody in Gujarati or Hindi, he may not understand English. Then how do you translate something in English into a vernacular language? You are just starting the therapy as a therapist and somebody says, I feel like killing myself. And you are terrified. Now what to do? Should I call the police? Should I call his parents? What should I do? As you practice more and more, you know when to call somebody and when not to call somebody. In India, people are very liberal with words. This is not as much of a crisis in India as it is outside. You will see hundreds of therapists where hundreds of people have said this and nobody did anything to himself or anybody else. But of course, it's a point of decision making, what to do. The patient's family person calls and asks you something, then what do you do? If you don't say anything, you are anxious. What will he say? Will he stop the therapy? If you say something, will it be breach of confidentiality? So one has to develop the knack of telling the parents how to say something in general and also communicate that I will not be able to share anything. And best is if you do it before the first session begins. That these are the do's and don'ts of the process. The patient refuses to visit an important point in his life. He says, I don't want to go there. Then what do? You know, if he goes there, healing will accelerate. But he says, I don't want to go there. Different people deal with it differently. Some people say, completely up to you. Only you can make choices for yourself. Whenever you are ready, we can revisit that important point because it's very important to visit that point because it will accelerate the healing process. But whenever you are ready, we can do it. You don't have to do it right now. Some people will couch it in sarcasm to say, if you don't want to heal yourself, I have no right to ask you that you should heal yourself. You are the best person to make choice for yourself. If you make a choice that you don't want to heal yourself immediately, I will respect your choice. Now, this is like a sarcasm with a loaded in sarcasm and an indirect challenge. This is a typical ISTDP way of dealing with it. Where you say, if you don't want to be happy, I have no right to tell you that you should be happy. I have to respect your choice. And obviously, it comes on our face. Because it's insane for anyone to claim this position that I don't want to be happy. Yeah.
Can we use humor in such situations like, oh, you want to keep on paying the doctor more and more?
Of
Well, you
course.
are welcome. You are welcome.
Correct. So this was all the elements of therapist anxiety. Apart from counter-transference projective identification, they will also create anxiety for the therapist. And of course, there will be professional anxieties. What if the patient stops coming? How do I pay my bills? The second important element in therapist heal thyself. The first is the therapist has to heal his own anxiety. And because this is so difficult to heal, usually we lose most of our early patients. The first 5 patients you get, it's very normal to lose 3 of them because our own anxiety is everywhere. Second area where the therapist has to heal himself is the pathology of the therapist. The pathology of the therapist cannot be a crippling pathology. And I have seen this, unfortunately, that in many, especially psychoanalytic schools, I have seen this. People are very liberal with allowing anybody to become a therapist. And even though they are not completely healed, they start practicing as a therapist. And in India, where you can do MA clinical psychology without undergoing training analysis yourself, this is even more pervasive. That anybody can do a 2-year course, master's course in clinical psychology, not have himself analyzed and start therapy, even if he is suffering from some pathology. So you will have many therapists, particularly in India, with a crippling pathology, and they will do all kind of crazy things. Let me give an example. I will not give names, but at Ahmedabad, there is a therapist who was seeing a patient, and the patient said, I also want to be a therapist. I want to see how it looks like from the other side. The therapist said, fine enough, we can do it. So the therapist asked the patient to sit on the chair and the therapist lying down on the couch. So this is kind of things that can happen when you have a crippling pathology and you allow the person to do therapy. Similarly, you can have huge projective identifications coming from the therapist himself. So you can have.
Can we have an example of huge projective identification coming from the therapist?
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
Normal.
In my training analysis, before my training analysis began, I was out on who could take me in for therapy because it's a long-term commitment. I went to a couple of therapists. One of the therapists that I went to, I would feel intensely uneasy in the presence. At that time, I did not know of projective identification. But now, later on, when I analyzed, I realized, this is also a good sentence. When I analyzed, I realized that the person has crippling pathology and does huge projective identifications and also does crazy
No
things.
shampoo.
So the person does huge projective identification. Now, if you have a person with psychotic pathology and it is not healed, and the person is sitting as a therapist, the chances of the therapist making huge projective identifications into the patient are very high. So the crippling pathology is something that has to be avoided. But less than crippling pathology, some open wound is good. Jung used to say only the wounded healer heals. And this was true in the shamanic area also. That the shaman used to have something unhealed of his own, which keeps him driving into that area. So when we talk of the therapist's pathology, crippling pathology has to be avoided. A mild, not benign wound helps everyone, and the pathology through which you have come, you are best at it. Now, some pathologies are very difficult for therapists to have. For example, and this is something which is difficult to avoid, that most therapists have some sort of personality disorder. This is what I have seen. Most good therapists, they have some sort of a personality disorder. Now, each personality disorder brings with it some problem. Now, that can be a asset for some patients and a liability for some patients. Like, last week, I saw an intensely narcissistic teenager. Now, it was like, I am a narcissist and he is a narcissist. So, it's a clash of two narcissistic egos. If there was somebody dependent in my place, the person would have felt far more at ease. But reverse the situation. A dependent comes to me, he feels far more comfortable. Then, my being a narcissist is an asset to him, rather than my being a dependent like him. Similarly, histrionicity is a difficult thing for a therapist to have. Borderline is a difficult thing for a therapist to have. And the combination also is difficult because then the chances of falling for the patient are very high. And then the patient is feeling seduced, not because of transference from the early childhood to the therapist, but because of the transference from the therapist himself. So it is not the transference of the patient that is guiding the seduction. It is a transference of the therapist which is guiding the seduction. Now, when that happens, actually the therapist is in therapy rather than the patient. If the therapist is making unconsciously a transference of the histrionic type of seduction onto the patient, then it is a therapist who is actually in the therapy. And then if the patient does not respond back, right, is not seduced, then he is actually the therapist to the therapist. So this creates very difficult situations that some personality disorders are very difficult to be there within the therapy room. And some are contextual, that for some patients it is an asset, for some patients it's a liability. Because if there are two narcissists in the room, the only way out is one identifies with the narcissism of the other. The smaller narcissist identifies with the narcissism of the bigger narcissist. And because of the power differential, it is more likely to be the patient identifying with the narcissism of the therapist. And like last week, this happened. A patient told me, I don't talk to my parents, but I like to talk to you. Because the person is caught in the game of omnipotence. Because he sees me as omnipotent, he wants to be with me. And this is a classical narcissistic problem, right? Even a dependent problem. In fact, of all personality disorder, the search of omnipotence.
In the first situation, the younger patient, he also was successful in his motive of devaluing his own parents. When he
Right.
said, I don't like to talk to them, but I like to talk to you. It
Correct.
means I please
The,
you and then
the,
I
the, the
dump my
split is,
parents.
yeah, the two splits are open. One is between his parents and me, and second is between him and me. Right? He has de-idealized the parents, idealized me. He has de-idealized himself, idealized me, and he is living his omnipotence by identifying with me. So step one is you project omnipotence on a person, and step two, you identify with him and vicariously live out your desire for omnipotence. And you have to take that route because you believe I am not good enough, but I cannot give up my desire for omnipotence. So I will live it out because I cannot give up the desire. So I will live it out by identification. Now the narcissist has the same search for omnipotence, but what he does is he says, I am omnipotent. So what he will have to do is to do the reverse. He lives out his search for omnipotence by making himself omnipotent, but that belief is a fragile belief. Any slap from reality can put it into shreds or pieces. So what he has to do is to maintain his omnipotence. He has to devalue the other. So the dependent cannot help appreciate the other, and the narcissist cannot help criticize the other. The purpose is the same. Maintain that game of omnipotence, live out the omnipotence. But the roads to the goal are different. Both are caught in the game of omnipotence. Should we stop for a 10-minute tea break? No? Yes? Okay. Anyone who is seeking addiction in omnipotence in addiction? Fine. So let us indulge in addiction for 10 minutes. 3:55, we come back at 4:05. Second part of the story, therapist heal thyself. Life experience of the therapist is very important. Therapy, unlike many other professions, is not strictly limited to technical knowledge. The therapist life experience is a very important ingredient of the therapist, apart from his knowledge, degree, technique, supervision, everything. Often you find what is called the BA, MA, PhD problem. That a person has just been in the academic world. He does his BA in psychology, MA in psychology, PhD in psychology, and gets into this profession. And he finds it very difficult to understand people coming from business, people coming from very different backgrounds. So one part is this, that this has to be enriched, the life experience of the therapist. The patient always makes it out if you understand his context or don't understand his context. And the more you understand his context, the more he will bring it into the therapy room. And more open he will be, more understood he will feel. The therapeutic alliance that we talk about will be strengthened if the therapist's life experience enables him to understand the patient better. So this is one point where the therapist has to heal himself if he does not have adequately heterogeneous life experience, he should get it. Therapist's own life. This is very important because there is no way a therapist can disassociate from what is going on in his own life. Quite a percentage of therapists actually have narcissistic traits and often have depression. And many choose this profession because it gives you respect without reason. That you want to sit on the holier than thou chair, where you are not scrutinized but somebody else is scrutinized. And you give out edicts, and therefore many people criticize therapy setup as the new priesthood. That a mere mortal comes to you and you speak from across the clouds with lightning and thunder. So many people criticize this as the new priesthood of modernity. And many people take to it because they are able to satisfy their narcissistic desires by sitting in the therapist's chair, or this is the profession they can do because they have depressive traits and they cannot adjust to any organizational working. That many people take to this because they cannot adjust to any organizational working. They don't have the social capacity. So they choose this lonely profession where you don't have to deal with people and preach everyone how they should get close to people. There is a couplet in Hindi, कभी कभी यूं भी हमने अपने दिल को बहलाया है, जिन बातों को खुद न समझे औरों को समझाया है. So this often happens that what is not operating in the life of the therapist, he preaches to others. So this can be a reason to look at that. Have you taken to therapy because you did not have the capacity to work in an organization? Have you taken to therapy because you are too depressed to do any demanding job which requires running around, and here you just have to sit and think? Have you taken to therapy because you want to avoid the world outside? Because this is an artificial situation. This is not the real world. The setup is a very artificial situation. Have you taken to therapy because it gives you a narcissistic position where you scrutinize others and others don't scrutinize you? So have you taken to therapy because you are a failure in your personal life? So all these reasons can be there. And for many therapists, this is true. That you will find a great percentage of therapists who are narcissistic, who are depressed, and who are failures in their own life. There is an old saying, your knowledge is precious. Keep it with you unless asked for. So this is what applies here, that many of them are preaching what they cannot practice. Are you living out only in the therapy room? There are many therapists who don't have a social life outside of the therapy room. This is the only place where they are living life. So therapy is a place to heal, not a place to live. You heal there and go and live outside. Unfortunately, for many therapists and many patients, this becomes the only living space. That they don't have any connection, any conversation, any occupation outside. They are only living in the therapy room. And this then becomes what I call the tragic holding state. A tragic state, but it provides some sort of holding. And one can get stuck there. There is a very good movie, The Treatment, in which the patient tells to his therapist, do you have a life? Do you have a wife? Or is this all that you live?
All
And
that
often it can be a situation that you are preaching the world how to set the mind right and live life, and you yourself not able to do it. So this is something that the therapist has to reflect and work upon it. Not necessary that he will succeed, but he should be sincere and honest to recognize it and work on it as much as his capability allows him to. Knowledge of the therapist. This is also an area where a lot of heal thyself has to happen. One of the words that people now talk about is eclectic. It's a word more abused and less used. And what they mean by this is, I will do what I like and call it psychoanalysis. And the word they use to cover it up is eclectic. Now, the real meaning of eclectic would be that you know one school of psychoanalysis very well, and then you bring in parts of other schools, because nobody can be an expert in everything. But if you don't know even one school of psychoanalysis well, you are just making a hodgepodge by bringing in whatever you feel like from whatever theory. That is chaos. That is not eclectic. That is desperation. In the face of your ignorance, it's desperation. So the eclectic is a misused word. So you need to know at least one school well, and then you can have parts of other schools which you bring in. You can also know one school well, and then you may bring in parts from the eastern side, holistic healing. But at least one school has to be known well. Therapist as a system. Now, this is very important. This involves both part of therapy that operates in language and part of therapy that operates outside of language. The containing capacity of the therapist, the positivity and cheerfulness of the therapist. The patient sense it very quickly, unconsciously. It's not that you give the patient a score that I have given a psychometric test and this is my positivity, this is my containing capacity. No. The patient intuitively will make out over the course of the first few sessions what is your containing capacity, what is your positivity and cheerfulness. And when the patient uses the therapist as a system for containing his difficult material, process it and give it back to him, these factors become very important. That how is the therapist as a system? Does he have a good containing capacity? Does he have positivity and cheerfulness? Or is he looking very depressed and gloomy to the patient? And obviously the patient by and large wants somebody positive and cheerful. So one part of therapist as a system is, what is his containing capacity? How much is the positivity and cheerfulness? And the third important point is, in the verbal area, how open is he and how ready is he to allow the patient to score points? For example, the patient tells me, she is a girl, she tells me, why are men so disappointing? And then she goes on with a full paragraph that I don't know any of my friends who has not reported disappointment with men. And then after some time she pauses to say, I know you are also a man. And then she smiles and she continues, but I don't say anything. And my facial features are very clear that I am not hurt and I am not trying to score points and I am not vindictive. That I am open and I am still smiling without anything. I have not got myself involved by identifying with what she called the man. And after some time, she smiles, and after that, I say, is smiling with it, You see, the word man is so inclusive that it includes the word women. So when we say men have created wonders, we include women also. But when we say women have included wonders, we don't include men. So then she brought out, she said, look at the word women and man is there. So I said, it is there in letter but not in spirit. But if you look at the word man, it is both letter and spirit. Anyway, the point was that she now feels comfortable to talk about men in critical ways because she knows I'm not taking it personally. That openness, that letting go is very important for a therapist. That he should never become a player. He should always be the referee, a creative referee. Sir, you had said something. Went away. Yeah, got it.
Came to funny.
Okay.
So woes, they get woes, all the woes they carry. So
women woe men and women woo men.
and pronounce it as women, women.
So, okay. So the idea there is, can you continue to be a happy player, happy referee and not a player? How much can you let go? The more you can, the more patient will use you as a system. And the more repressed material will come out with safety. Amorality is very important. And this is tested, amorality is tested when somebody is into sociopathy or somebody is into very destructive addiction or somebody is into extremely strong histrionicity. That is where the amorality gets tested. That are you really amoral or do you bring in your morality and do's and don'ts when it gets to the extremes? Histrionicity reminds me, one of the situations where in histrionicity the vivid Oedipal transference does not happen is where there is a defiance of the father. That if there is an anger towards the father, because the anger is transferred to the therapist, there is a refusal to, there is no possibility actually of the Oedipal transference happening till that very strong anger is there. It may happen, it may coexist, but usually it is not as vivid. And the second extreme of it is also true. You will see many histrionic patients who come to you because they have seen you somewhere and they feel seduced. So they come to therapy essentially for a relationship. And when they realize it's not happening, they will leave. So if you look at my lecture, why patients leave, I have listed out 50 factors why patients leave, and this is one of the factors. Openness is very important. That can you be open and not be held back by theory? Often patients will say, you are not understanding what I am trying to say. And that is because you are applying a wrong theory. And that is giving you wrong output. Or you are focusing on something inaccurate. Let us say a patient tells you, you don't understand what I am saying. I am living in a desert, and on the other side is a garden which is full of mango trees, the ripe mangoes there. but I am not allowed to go there. But my relatives are allowed to go there. My friends are allowed to go there. I cannot go there. I am condemned to this desert. And you don't know how I feel being outside of that mango orchard and not being able to go there. And I say, can you say something about the mangoes which you desire but are denied? And the patient tells me, despite so many sessions of therapy, you don't understand me. I am not talking about the mangoes. I am talking about the air which is there. I cannot breathe without that air. Mangoes don't matter. I just live with the air which is there in that orchard and I'm denied that air. I want that air. Without that, I cannot live. It is the air of that orchard, not the mangoes. Now, what was happening? The core of the person was dependence. And I was treating her for bipolar. So for me, the moment I think bipolar is at the core, you look at object gain and object loss. So these mangoes were signifying that omnipotent object which were desired and are not there. So the gain of the mango will create that manic high and the loss of the mango will create that lower depressive cycle. But what was important for her? The important thing for her was that the dependence was more critical than bipolarity. It was a mixed personality disorder. And therefore, she was asking me, forget the bipolarity. First, focus on the dependence which is at the root of me. Because it is a dependent who says this, that I cannot breathe without that air. Or when I experience a loss, I feel the water is till this level and I cannot breathe. Classical dependent statements. So that can happen. And when I said fine, I did not say anything. And then I tried to understand after the session and I could get the point that I was focusing on something wrong. And here, the first medicine is people. That people is the first medicine in this case. It is not so much catharsis, it is the gain of people. And I was focusing on catharsis. It is the lived experience which will heal far more than any therapy action in the therapy room. So this is a situation in which one can go wrong, but if one is open, the patients usually are very forgiving. Come to the last slide. Doing therapy school variations. This is very important. How doing therapy will vary from school to school. There will come important points in any therapy session, which I call as junction points. Junction because, like a railway junction, you can come to that point from many directions, and from there you can go in many directions. So you will have choice. At this point, do I bring in Freudian theory, Kleinian theory, what theory I bring in, and how do I move forward? Do I do holding or do I do interpretation? Do I work in then and there? Do I work in here and now? Do I bring myself in or do I not bring myself in? Do I do it right now or I postpone it for a later session? Do I go into interpretation or do I go into active imagination, which is development of the theme? Like Jung had a very different approach to dreams. In Freudian technique, we have a converging approach that from the dream material, we come down to the manifest, the repressed material in the unconscious. In Jung, what he did was, he would take the dream and ask the person to magnify the dream even further. What is called active imagination. You ask a person to dream about a part of the dream. You take up one element from the dream and ask him to develop further. So all these are options. What do you do? So every important point in the therapy session is like a junction point. And often there is no objective answer. It is only a subjective judgment by which one proceeds. And different therapists will do it very differently. Transference, we did that. What do you do with it? Do you consider everything in transference, certain things in transference? Do you evoke pure transferences or do you not evoke pure transferences? Another important point across, so this is important across schools. The Kleinians, Bionians will invoke transference the highest. Freudians number 2. But the moment you get into Kohut and Winnicott, this will be very less. In Kohut, you will have self-object transferences, but other parts will not evoke so much. So based upon the school, this will vary. Junction point treatment will vary. Dealing with transference will vary. Your focus on origin or goal also will vary. Like Freud and Jung were completely different on this point. Freud was always focused on the origin. What happened in early life that this happened? Jung was always focused on the goal. That whatever has happened to you, how is it frustrating your individuation, your journey of life? Where do you want to reach and how is the problem frustrating you? So Jung was always concerned more with the goal and Freud was always concerned more with the origin. In philosophical terms, Freud was ontologically driven, whereas Jung was teleologically driven. Philosophically, both were very different. Freud always was focused on what has happened in the past. Jung was always focused on where do you want to go in future. Obviously, they are not mutually exclusive. Often you have to go to the past before you can go to the future. But the emphasis of the two was very different. And therefore, both schools, they have very different kind of focus. If you bring a dream to a Freudian and a Jungian, this will be very clear. The Freudian will interpret it to go to the early life sources. And the Jungian will start focusing on how is it frustrating your program of life? What is your program of life? What do you want to become? So in that, if you look at time sense, Freud's favorite tense was the past and Jung's favorite time sense was the future. Here and now versus then and there, we have done it. This is different between schools. In the Kleinian school, here and now is the highest, Freudian number 2. Other schools, they don't bring themselves in much. You can do it occasionally, but they are not obsessed with it. Holding versus interpretation. On this point, the Kohutian school is different from others. In the Kohutian school, the holding is far more than you find in other schools. In Freudian, Kleinian, Bionian, the classical mainstream of vintage psychoanalysis, the interpretation is more. Intensity and speed of affect release. This varies from school to school. In ISTDP, the intensity and speed is the highest. In Kohutian school, it is the lowest, and everything else falls in between. Anchoring something in a philosophical framework versus a standalone therapy. Most schools of psychoanalysis, they don't anchor themselves in a philosophical framework, consciously speaking. By default, of course, you always get anchored. But consciously speaking, you don't bring that anchoring in the operational part of therapy. That anchoring is more seen as an academic discourse. But when you talk of a Jungian school or logotherapy school, you actually bring that philosophical orientation into the therapy room in an operational sense. Meaning, in the Jungian school, you would say that there is a million-year-old man in all of us. And what is that million-year-old man trying to say? And he is speaking through dreams. So let us understand the dreams to see what the million-year-old man in us is trying to say. This you will never do in anything Freudian. This you will never do in anything Kleinian. Even Winnicott won't do it. If you look at the Eastern schools, all the Hindu psychology schools, they will bring in philosophical framework as a very active operational ingredient in the therapy room. Because for them, the karmic element is a very operational element. It's not only a philosophical element. So they will operationalize this otherwise philosophical element into a discourse of why certain things are happening. What is the reason of your suffering? Why did only X happen in childhood and not Y? Can it be karmic? And is then the suffering meaningful? That the suffering is then no longer an unmitigated evil. It's an atonement. You are paying an EMI for the loan taken before. And therefore, it's a just thing to happen. And once it's accepted as that, then there is no fight with it, but to finish it off as early as possible. So ultimately, you go to healing, but the arguments are very different. Another important differentiator between schools is schools which believe philosophically in tabula rasa, meaning at the birth, you are a blank sheet of mind. That man is born with a clean slate, and in experience, everything is written on that blank sheet. What is philosophy they call tabula rasa theory. Versus other schools in philosophy which talk about design in nature. That we are not born with a clean slate. We already have predilections. There is already a design at work, and the design unfolds over the course of life. So nature is not a blank sheet, it is a purposeful actor, and there is a design in nature and a purpose in nature. So if you look at tabula rasa driven schools, you will see they will give more importance to the outside than to the inside. Those who, for example, those schools which bring in society in a big way in psychoanalysis. The first to do it was Alfred Adler, and now we see Lacan. They bring in society in a big way, the big other. So Adler was the first, and Lacan followed later. Now there, it is more of a tabula rasa approach. That the outside is writing on the blank sheet. Whereas if you look at Jungian approach, it is very different. It is like the design of life is already there in the blueprint. The seed of a tree already has the entire blueprint how the tree should be. A neem tree always will give a neem tree, it will not give a mango tree. The blueprint of the whole tree is embedded in the seed. Similarly, the blueprint of the whole program of life is embedded in our psyche. And the unfolding happens just as a tree grows. Just as a tree grows from the seed, and at different times, periods, the tree undergoes different physiological processes. Similarly, a human being undergoes different processes, but the program of life is nothing but unfolding of that core blueprint which is already there. So there we talk of design in nature, that the mind is not a tabula rasa at birth, it already is structured in a way. And therefore, the inside out becomes more important than outside in. So when you talk of constitution and environment, theories which are based upon tabula rasa, they will have environment as a major factor compared to constitution. And theories which base themselves on design in nature, the inside will be, the constitution will be more important than the environment. So if you look at Klein, Klein is very driven from the inside out. That the outside is not so important. The inner world of fantasies and creating objects and relating to them in fantasy, that is far more important than what the outside world is. So how the child interprets the mother becomes far more important than the mother herself. Whereas if you look at Winnicott, the reality of the mother is very important compared to the fantasy. So in Winnicott, the outside becomes more important. So the more you are anchored your tabula rasa approach, the outside will become important. The more you are anchored in design in nature approach, the inside will become more important. And correspondingly, ideas of pathology and healing also will change. And how you do therapy also will change. Transpersonal versus traditional. Transpersonal means something which is not personal. It's not a personal experience. So one interpretation will be the big other, that something which is not personal is transpersonal. But it's not limited to the big other, like it's not limited to society, culture, language, and law, not even to history and culture, but it also has, it can have, transpersonal can also cover intergenerational and reincarnational. That you can have an intergenerational transmission of trauma. And this they have confirmed by studies on the mice, that traumas can get genetically transmitted. So we don't know to what extent it operates in human beings, and if it operates, in what disorders it operates and how. But the door has been opened that there is a possibility of intergenerational transmission of trauma. Ian Stevenson, he did a lot of work in reincarnation. And he brought in this whole idea that, which in Hindu psychology always was there. But in the West, this idea of reincarnation is also a transpersonal idea. That can there be remnants from the last life which are shaping what you call constitution in this life? Because when we use the word constitution, usually we are substituting one unknown by another. So when we don't know what to say, we say genetic or constitutional. But that only is a word, does not say anything in explanatory terms. So the word has neither explanatory power nor predictive power. So it's not a very good concept in that sense. So transpersonal can have intergenerational. It can refer to reincarnational. It can also refer to suprahuman or non-local events. And this brings us into that esoteric area of locality and non-locality. That how do events happen? Is the effect of every event strictly local in space and time, or can it be non-local? And how does the principle of non-locality affect the psychic operation? So that is where we get into parapsychology. So transpersonal also gets into parapsychology. So most schools don't go into the transpersonal except the Jungian school versus the traditional approach. Most schools have the traditional approach. Some schools will have an experimental approach versus traditional approach. Some of the behavioral schools, they actually design experiments in which a whole setup is created, a person is put there, somebody else is asked to do ABC, and the person is supposed to do XYZ. So it's a very experimental way of overcoming trauma. That if you are afraid of heights, then let us create an experiment where you are surrounded by people whom you feel safe with, and slowly you climb up. Psychodrama uses this to a great degree, experimentally creating it, concretizing. For example, instead of saying id, ego, and superego, three people will play the role. One will play the role of ego, one superego, one id. So it concretizes everything outside. And it's much easier for us to understand because it's concretized outside instead of the abstract theory inside. So psychodrama uses it very voraciously. Behavioral therapists use it voraciously, the experimental. Most in the Hindu psychology, of course, it's very, very pervasively used. The whole area of idol therapy, which we call idol worship, but if you look at the entire idol science, you can divide it into many parts. There is a spiritual part, a mystical part, an energy part, and a therapy part. So if you look at one component of idol science, which is idol therapy, you can see a lot of experimentation. Those who are into Tantra, they are very good at it. Lastly, classical versus romantic vision of psychoanalysis. This has always been two different ways of looking at psychoanalysis. The classical notion has to do with materialism, pessimism. There is nowhere to go. As Freud said, our goal is to convert unbearable happiness into unbearable unhappiness into bearable unhappiness. That's a classical vision. That there is nowhere to go. Best is optimization. There is no final solution. And that does not mean that people are not talking of cure. You can divide schools into two. Those schools which talk of cure, although it cannot be done in every case, but they do accept the possibility of cure. And there are some which will not look at cure as a goal. That is separate. Both of them can be still classical. The romantic vision of psychoanalysis has to do with positivity, hope, a liberal assessment of limits of human potential. Looking at things positively. For example, Kohut talked about a positive version of narcissism, a healthy version of narcissism. Similarly, you can talk of healthy sublimated forms of everything that you see as pathological. And there the limits of human potential are higher. There is a possibility of cure. There is a possibility that someday we will come to something after which we will be able to radically change the human condition. And the condition of the human condition is not an eternal as it is. It is, we are in the process of change, and we will cross that threshold after which a radical positive difference will come. So there are two different versions of psychoanalysis, the classical and the romantic. The romantic is far more positive, the classical far more realistic or negative. And that goes across in terms of model of the mind, in terms of pathogenesis, in terms of healing, in terms of limits of human potential, in terms of interpretation of dreams. This orientation goes across. So different schools will be doing it differently. Freud, Klein, Bion, Lacan, they will be in the classical school. Winnicott, Kohut, Jung will be in the romantic school. ISTDP also in classical school. Positive psychology, of course, not a part of psychoanalysis, but it is the extreme romantic version of it. Parapsychology, even more than positive psychology. Any questions? So with this, we'll complete technique, and I hope that you'll put it to use. Any questions you have?
It will influence for sure. I will not be using it with sanctity and like a pure these things. But let me not say a negative statement about myself that I'm too old. No, I can still learn.
You have a basket of tools with you. Pick
Yeah.
up what you feel is best suited to the situation.
Yes, sir.
It's good to have the basket, not that everything you have to use at every patient.
We will be meeting on Saturdays from next meeting, or is
नहीं
it not yet?
we still will continue with Monday
Okay.
till Madhusudan goes on a break
Okay.
because he has some lectures lined up.
Sir, I'm thinking that I won't be able to attend after all that begins. So maybe for 1 or 2 months, I'll take off from this class and join in again once I'm done in February, end
Fine,
of February.
fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So fine. So it's starting from mid-Jan, I believe.
It's starting from Jan 12th.
Right.
But before that, I have some lecture at Karnavati University and other Nirma is beginning. So I'll be now too full. I may not be able to attend at all. My brother is coming from America day after tomorrow. So all those things are going to come together.
Right. Then after 2 months we'll meet again.
Yeah, definitely, definitely, sir. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
See you.
See you.